So I just have a few slides. Um, Let me dive into that. This one will be maybe a little bit more slides than my usual class just because there's content, but most of it we're going to be into um, actually into FileMaker. So the first thing I'm going to say about this class is the reason to be here is to interact and ask questions. Um, Otherwise, you can watch videos for a lot of this stuff. So I'm hoping all of you guys can have anybody who has any questions at any time, please throw them in as we go in the presentation. We have a small enough group of people, we can totally do that. Okay. About me, I'm old and I've been doing things for a really long time. One thing that's fun recently is I started a podcast with Krista Polite called Claire's Talk AI. So you can get that. YouTube is probably the best place to get it, but there's also, it's on any podcast app. And I'm looking for guests. So if anybody has something to say, something fun you're working on, AI or not, hit me up. Um, so stick around. So basically the whole thing's for 45 minutes, however much we split for live stuff. And it's probably going to be like combined, 45 minutes of just combined stuff. Um, why are we doing this? So WAN, I think is, well, I'll just say this. When I was at AppWorks, we converted almost all of our customers from using a local server to a WAN server. And which worked out really well when COVID hit because people could work at home. And then all these other things that it empowers when you have a cloud server, it's just so good. And there's some great hosting companies out there to make this really easy. I'm offering 2-hour classes for $99. In 2 weeks, I'm having this class, but 2-hour version of it where we integrate all these things into your databases. So in that class, all of you share your screen, and then we integrate these ideas and solve the problems. It's really, really useful. So you can sign up for that on my website, Navarre.Training. Also, just set up an appointment with me, calendly.com/mattnav, and you can make a 20-minute appointment. We can talk about whatever for free. There's things in FileMaker that you think actually are bad, but they're not. So unstirred calculations are not evil at all. Um, you can have a detail layout, the form view, with as much on there as you want. And because we're only looking at one record, even if it's got records from a lot of the other place, it's pretty fast because it's only doing uh, it's not doing that many queries like it would do if you're looking for a bunch of records. Of course, if there's some caveats there, but anyway, that's good news. FileMaker doesn't care about the size of the graph, the number of layouts, the number of records. None of those things are limits to, in other words, if you have a gigantic database, it can still be ridiculously fast on the WAN. So don't let anybody tell you that having millions of records is automatically a bad idea. Um, and even like wide tables, not a great idea, but it's not a killer, depending upon how you do it. Okay, what you got to really avoid is list layouts. List layouts are totally where you're going to really feel it. And summary fields are also really bad. Um, and then deeply unstirred calculations, which I'll be showing. So that's a calculation that looks at related records and the calculated field and that and on down the line kind of a thing. Okay, some gotchas. These are things that I have found in the last bunch of years that you don't think of when you're trying to figure out why a layout is slow. We had a case where there was a filtered portal looking at a table that had 1 million records in it, but you only wanted to show 20 for a given record. So FileMaker had to do all this work to do it, where there's better ways to do that. I think now it's a little bit more faster than it used to be, but those can be a gotcha. So there may be better ways to do that. SQL, SQL commands can be really slow. So if you've got layout calculations, something like that uses a SQL statement, that sometimes is a thing. We've totally forgot about tooltips, and a tooltip can have a really complex function in that. And if you have a lot of those, that can hit speed. Same thing with conditional formatting. Earlier today, I was working on a database where I copied some fields from one context to another and totally forgot conditional formatting, conditional visibility, And so it's trying to resolve all these relationships that can't be resolved. And so that hits an issue. And also, you should definitely be looking at field indexing. As we go through the demo, remind me of any of these things that come up as they come up, because I might maybe forget. So what can we do? The number one thing by far is to simplify your database as much as you can. Um, remove fields, remove summaries, um, just remove everything that you can down to the point where your users start to complain, um, and then add things back as needed. But the simpler the database, kind of the better in a lot of ways. Another trick we're going to be looking at is redundant stored fields, which you can populate with scripts. I'll talk more about that as we look at it. PSOS is certainly a big thing, user things on your server. Themes and styles are extremely important with FileMaker Go and WebDirect. They don't have that much of a performance hit on FileMaker Pro, but they make your life a lot better. And then I'm definitely looking for your ideas of stuff as well here. Okay, let's forget about this and go into FileMaker. I see a couple of chat questions. Oh, DigFM. So you got Chris just posted a link, or Eric posted a link about, I guess, Chris Ippolite speaking. Okay, so I'm going to kill video and go into FileMaker. This is the database that I use to teach the larger class. So it's kind of like I don't know, maybe an answer key, but it's basically, it has a bunch of demo features that I show, but it's not actually like a production database. So it's kind of a good scratching sandbox, I think is the word I'm looking for. So this server, I'm in Greece, where we don't really have great internet. Alex, you got a question?
I'm wondering about the gradient at the top of your layout.
And whether that's performance or why you just hate
Yeah. No, 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 it's not. I mean, it's not that, but I've often heard that the gradient fill is
I I mean,
performance. But
I don't think so. That loaded in a small fraction of a second, and there's two gradients on there. So I
Probably
mean,
not as bad as a image.
yeah. And this over here is actually a web viewer with looking at Google API.
interesting.
Good question. Um, okay, so this database is a sample one. The graph is pretty straightforward. So it's a CRM, basically system, company, person, invoice, logging, and then on the invoices, there's line items and products. So you got company to invoice line item to product. So that's kind of a stack there. And that's a really good example because most databases that you guys are working on might actually have, databases that are deep like that. Okay, so let's go into one of these records. So, oh yeah, and what I was in the middle of saying is I'm in Greece, not great internet. The server is actually in Germany because AWS doesn't have a data center close to me. And so it's 1,000 miles away. So one thing I'll throw out there that's a soapbox opinion: do all of your development on a WAN hosted database so you can feel the pain. And number two, do all of your development with large sample sets of data, not 20 records. So this is 10,000 records, I think a way larger number of invoices and line items and stuff like that. Because otherwise you really can't feel the pain. And yeah, so that's important. So there's stuff going on here, right? So I've got popovers, I've got card windows in different places, maybe here. Um, all of the tab objects actually have calculations on them. So that means these are actually hitting each of these tables. So one thing that you may or may not know is when you have a tab panel and you have a huge amount of data on one of these tabs, FileMaker does not load the relationship until you hit the tab. It does not look at the related
Oh,
data. But if you put a counter on there, then it does. It's actually looking at all this related data. Also, anything that you have off to the side is invisible. FileMaker does not calculate any of that. Um, with very few exceptions, I think Matt Petrowski found something. So this layout, you can really kind of go to town with the complexity of your main layout. I'm going to flip through records, flip, 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 flip. It's really fast, right? Even looking at related data for invoices, the performance is really good. So this would be totally acceptable. So if I click on an invoice, now I've got the invoice detail screen, similar kind of a thing, right? I have 129,000 records. I'm going to go to the list view. Okay, that took a couple of seconds. Actually, yeah, maybe two. And then if I go through records here, I'm looking at the entire set. So I'm going to go page, page, page. It's not great. So what's on this layout that might be causing that problem? There's only one bit of related data, and that's just looking at the organization name. So from the invoice up to the organization. Let's just see what happens if we take this one field off. Page, 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 page. Night and day. So every related field that you have on a list view has a huge impact. And the farther away the relationship, the bigger the impact. And it's not like double, it's a bigger multiple than that. But sometimes you have to have it. So the other thing that we're doing here is I'm using stored fields. So if I have let's take a look at the database management here. In the invoice table, I have a field called invoice amount stored. It's a plain old number field. And what this does is it stores the amount of the invoice, looking at all the line items, adding them up, times, with the quantities and all that stuff. But it's can get stale. So it has to get updated by some mechanism. If you do it this way, the performance is incredibly fast, but the trade-off is you have to have some method to keep it updated. So here's the other way that we usually do it, which is a regular old calculation of the invoice line item. So sum of the line items. Okay, what's the line item look like? The line item is quantity times price, which is a calculated field. In this case, though, it's a stored calculation. So, oh, actually, I don't think it is. Aha, it's not indexed. But this would automatically index, and that would make a difference in the speed. And you can only have it be indexed, of course, if all of the fields in the calculation are in the same table. So if it's related, it's not indexable. But your stored field can always be indexed because it's just storing a value. So invoice line item, and then invoice, and then if we go one level up to company, I have another field that I want to know, like the total amount of all of the invoices for this company. So that would be this guy, see total invoiced, which is a summary of the invoice amount, which is a summary of the invoice line items. That is what I would call a deeply unstored calculation. A calculation that references a calculation that references a calculation. Yeah, in multiple tables. That makes sense? Everybody got that? Crickets. So then to
Yes,
fix
I think
that,
we're all muted, but yes.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, got it.
Okay. So I do the same thing with the stored amount up there as well. So if you really want to go turbo for speed, this is a technique that can make a huge difference. So if I go up to my company and I go to a list, so this is what I would call a super fast customer list, right? Page, 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 page. It's basically instantaneous. And it's only loading 50 records at a time, but FileMaker's commands are so quick to the server that it just doesn't take any time. And it even has sub-summaries. So obviously, if I do a sort on a huge number of records, it's going to take a really long time. So I'd recommend against sorting with a gigantic found set. But if I find like all the records with contacts this month, 251, I can then sort those by type or, something else and get really fast results with the sub-summary break. Okay, let's take a look at the slow version. I'm going to do it with a small found set. Waiting, just spinning beach ball, spinning beach ball, spinning beach ball, spinning beach ball. I should count the number of seconds here. Okay, this is the exact same layout, except I added a field on here with the deeply unstored calculation invoice. So if I were to page through this, page down, wait, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good use of your time, right? It took about 10 seconds. So if I switch that field out, well, if I take the field off and hit the correct button, we'll see the difference in speed is night and day, right? Page, 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 basically instantaneous. If I use my stored field, total invoice stored, now I get back to my same performance. Let's see. Oh, you know what? I don't think I've populated that field, so that's a little bit of a cheat, isn't it? I'm going to show all records and go to the first record. Maybe the first ones are stored. Yeah, so I actually haven't done the script yet to update that. But basically, even whether it has a value or not, it's going to page instantly because this is just a field in this table. And even doing a search on it would be instantly fast. Yeah, that was a fraction of a second because it's just a stored field in this table. I guess I'm hitting that nail pretty hard. Um, yeah, so we can see that. So how do you kind of make this work, right? My favorite test record, Hank's used nuclear reactor parts. Um, so if I was editing an invoice and I change something, and these are stored values, they're not going to get updated. So if these are all calculated fields, um, that's actually C line amount. So let's see. Oh yeah, yeah. So in this case, it's actually just quantity times price. That's actually a very, very fast calculation. But what I really need to happen is if I add another line item, um, to have this automatically do the math. And so if I'm changing any field, that it automatically updates the math. The way that I do that is with a script trigger on all of the fields that are editable. And it's a really, really complex script, so pay close attention. All right, these are the 2 lines of code that it does. Um, so what it's doing is it's actually using the calculated field. So those actually don't cost anything. By the way, a calculated unstored field that's not used anywhere, not on a layout, has no cost. I still don't like them. I use them when necessary, but they don't have any impact. Also, a summary field has no impact at all if it's not on the layout. So food for thought. So it's basically setting the stored amount with those bits of data and then checking for an error and then exiting. So every time I make a change to the quantity, the product, or the price, it runs that script and updates my record. What's not happening is if I go through my, uh, oh, um, oh yeah, so these are actually using those stored fields, right? So these are the three, this is the stored amount. If I put the calculated ones here, you see a really big difference in the speed. Um, but what I'm not doing is I think I have a field on here that shows the invoice total. See total invoiced. So this actually, I'll flip through records, flip, flip, flip. So that's taking maybe a half a second to process the record. I'll use my stored one, and it's at least twice as fast. Yeah, maybe 3 times as fast. So that's a pretty big difference there. But then I have to make sure that this gets updated, right? Because this won't equal what these are, obviously. So then I have to have that same kind of a script. Um, where's my update? We'll sort recalc, right? I have to have the same kind of a thing at the company level. So set the field. total invoice stored to total invoiced calculated. And then I could probably trigger that. I think I'm actually using a recent record thing on here. Um, I'll just turn it on in the menu for the moment. Wait, that was the wrong one. So this should then update that recount company, and totally did not. Okay, well, demo time. I didn't get an error. So the C total invoice is just broken right now, which looks right. I'm not going to research it. It's a bug I can easily fix. But yeah, I just wanted to really kind of make the point about having to do that. By the way, it actually sort of illustrates that this has to be, you have to be very careful. If data can be edited somewhere else, then it's not going to get updated. If a record is deleted, it might not get updated. Um, so you have to be, if you're going to use this method to speed things up, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. Um, Also, weirdly, this is how things had to be done back in the mainframe days. It was impossible to show related data in when computers were young. Um, and so kind of what I've learned as I've been a database developer longer is the more techniques you can use that are the ones that they used in the 60s and 70s, the faster your databases are going to be. And also the more things that you can do that are totally modern web programming, the faster your FileMaker databases are going to be. So that's using like a lot of local stored things, a lot of layout calculations, um, stuff like that. Okay, so what were the things in the intro or anything related to WAN performance do you guys have questions about? Because we're at the point now where we can start looking at whatever you guys want to talk about. And were there questions? Yeah, using a C prefix field name. That's an old habit.
I know
Um,
some people frown on it, but I use it as a suffix. But yeah, same thing where I just want
yeah,
to be able to on the spot see if it's stored or unstored.
yeah,
And sometimes I communicate that to some of the power users too. I say, yeah, just take a look out for those things.
yeah. I do that. Field naming. I try to keep my field names really simple. And I always use ID. Lexi, do you still have your hand up?
I do. I have it up again, I should say.
Okay.
Uh, so two things. One is like a checklist for all of those hoops, right? Because like that's really where the rubber meets the road. Because I'm always
Yeah.
like, you don't find the place it's not updating until
Yeah.
you find it when you weren't looking for it. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. That could be a
So
really useful
a,
blog
a
post.
kind of a bulletproof way to do it would be to have like a server-side script that runs and looks at it like every 5 minutes or something. Um, or actually have your update be entirely server-side. You could do it much more um, you could do it with, much more, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Painfully, I guess, with a lot more effort, basically. So that it solves a problem that's a really, really big problem for some databases, but it's not free at
Yeah.
all. So that's, I guess, my point there. Angelos.
And no, I
Oh,
have
yeah, go
two.
ahead. Two. Okay.
Um, so wondering, and I have the same problem with this, maybe even more so, but I see a lot of people try to solve this with auto enter calculations,
Yep.
but you
Uh,
also have the updating.
okay. Soapbox. Um,
That's what I was hoping for. I knew you'd have a soapbox.
yeah, I do. So 100% of the functions in here should not be used, and 100% of the functions in here should not be used. except for like creation and modification, obviously like UUID, but never a looked up value, never a calculated value. You use no validation of any kind. Um, so these are there because of FileMaker 3. They're not there because of FileMaker 20. 100% of the things you could do here could and should be done in scripting because you get way more control. So for example, your example of an auto enter value, where it does a calculation. The problem is something else could change it, right? So the time the record is created, or if a quantity is changed or something like that, it can automatically update it, but it can only do it on local data. It can't do it relationally. It can't do a lot of other checks. And I think, as you pointed out, if something else sets it, then it doesn't get updated. So I guess that's a
Like,
so,
what do you mean something else sets it?
so if you have, let's say you have a script in your data file, or some other place that's actually using a set field command, this may not get triggered. So like the calculated value, if you do it on the first field, it should work, but you might have another method that actually sets it that this doesn't get set or this doesn't get called. So because of that,
Hmm.
and because you now have logic at multiple layers, this is why I don't use it. So I think 100% of your logic should be in your scripting and as little as possible in field definitions and as little as possible in the graph.
Like
There's
I've seen
nothing.
cases where people like add a modification timestamp to the calculation sort of gratuitously, but just to
Yeah,
sort of try to force it to
to recalc.
update all the
I
time. It's like,
Yep. I've seen that. It's actually not a bad thing. I just I don't know. I guess my soapbox is I don't put any complexity at that layer, because I can't see what's happening. I can't use script debugger on it. If something goes wrong, I can't see why it went wrong. Um, it's just the mechanisms that have it are opaque, and so I don't like having the complexity in two places.
But
That's
what if you're working on a database that's already been, you're working on something that's already has all that in it? Then what?
oh, Kylie. Yeah, because you and I are working on this. You have to just kind of be where you are. Like if you're working on a database that has that stuff in it, you have to play in that sandbox. You can't rewrite it because it's not worth it. Rocky, I know you're totally in the same situation. Um, so yeah, FileMaker's been around for a really long time. Probably a lot of you are working on databases that were created in 6 or before. And those are going to be hard. You kind of have to, in order to speed things up, you'd have to make new layouts that are simplified. Um, but all the old structure might still be there. Angelos, we never got to, did we?
Doesn't mind. It's interesting things we're discussing. Just wanted to add up on what you said about the legacy solutions. I think this is the pain, the real pain. So whenever you're designing from scratch, some new techniques and new approaches on the table. So the real
Mhm.
deal is how to deal with those legacy solutions. And from my short
Yep.
experience, I remember that one of the best decisions we had was to choosing when to delay. So at some point you have to query, at some point you have to burden the server with, give me the data. So
Yep.
you have to choose wisely if you have to do it on launch, which is more or less expected, or if you had to do it as you did in your demo with your
On
record by
record
record
mode.
basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so lists are 100% the worst. And I think it's a one-way road to go with everything being stored, no conditional formatting, simple lists. And by the way, this is how enterprise systems do this as well.
Yeah.
So sometimes I would add that as of an idea. Sometimes we have to take a look on how enterprise systems work and what are the limitations they have. And sometimes we love, as FileMaker developers, we love providing freedom, but
Yeah.
sometimes we might consider apply and enforce limitations to keep things performant and robust. And I think this is key. We don't usually do
Mm.
that. We, I speak for myself, but I think everyone can
Yeah.
relate.
Beeswax has a crazy thing that they use for a lot of their solutions. They actually have like a local database. I can't remember exactly all the stuff of how it works, but basically, like when you log in, It downloads a database to your computer and
That's
it opens up
amazing.
that database file. And then that gets populated with a bunch of data from the server. And then all of the
That's
interactions you do are getting
crazy.
in that local file. And then when you commit it, it does a transaction and sends that back up to the server. That's serious extra credit to get to that point. Alexi, did you work on systems like that there?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and a lot of this stuff is born of necessity because when your WAN is in
Yeah.
China,
Yeah.
it's just nothing works,
Yeah. Yep.
You need a proxy.
So
and
then is your data not live? Because
Oh, it's still
it's not
live.
committed?
No, well, in that situation, yeah, it wouldn't be committed. You wouldn't be working on live data. It would, again, like Angelo says, enterprise systems and really most other systems are transactional. When you're looking at data and someone else changes it, you don't see the data force, update to you. You have to do some sort of a refresh command. FileMaker has always been live and always pushed the data out, which is one of the reasons why it's not fast and why these issues exist. Because if you create or modify a record, every other user gets the server like reaches out to them if they're looking at that screen, and then their screen flickers and they see the change. Um,
Right.
this can
But in
really
That's
kill
why
this,
your
you lose
desktop.
stuff out of
there's
your cart on
elaborate
Black
stuff.
Friday.
Okay, hold on,
There's
two people.
elaborate stuff to like a soft lock on the records that you download so the user can
Yep.
decide like no one can modify these while I'm doing it, or they
Mhm.
can, and then it checks and gives a message and says, hey Alexi, Matt modified this while you were modifying it.
Yep.
Who wins? That it gets pretty elaborate very
Yep.
fast. But
Yep. So the if is the juice worth the squeeze becomes a really, really big thing. There's all of this is trade-offs, all of it. Um, you can do things the super simple FileMaker way and just have all calculated fields and like what we're used to, and then you're going to get really, really rough performance. Eric was also talking about another thing that can really work before we had so Citrix. So using a remote desktop kind of a thing, um, controlling a computer's screen, and that computer or a virtual computer is next to the server. So if you're AWS hosted, you can get like an AWS instance of Windows that's next to the server. So basically on the same ridiculously high speed network. Um, and then you're doing screen sharing, and then all you're doing is passing screens. If your server's in China, you almost have to do that, Alexi. Um, and then the speed is insane because FileMaker has immediate access to it. That's also why Perform Script on server is so fast. Uh, hundreds or thousands of times faster than doing it locally.
So what do you think of WebDirect for almost the same kind of performance?
Yes. WebDirect is ridiculously fast for that reason. Um, because all the calculation happens on the server. Yeah. For the last year, I was working on a really large WebDirect solution, and using all these techniques, it was ripping. There was nothing that took even a half a second to process.
But it's designed to do so. I mean, it's a
Yeah, it was designed
fundamental
from
part of it.
scratch.
It's design. Yeah. And I think it's
Yeah.
key. You're lucky enough when you're actually working a system that is designed to be like it is. Sometimes,
Well, yeah, but I'm also working on, with Kylie, we're working on a system that I actually wrote 25 years ago using all the best standards at the time. And then a whole bunch of other developers did. I didn't create it. So someone else created it who didn't know FileMaker. And they got a whole bunch of things right. And a whole bunch of things were best practices 25 years ago. And they needed to be tossed. So we like redid a whole bunch of stuff. But all of the fields were right. So we just kept them in that case. We just redid all the layouts from scratch and a lot of the scripts. And that's actually something you can do. So if you have an old database, um, you can reskin it in a less painful way and put as much of the complexity in the layout and in scripting as possible. And then you're only looking at the data in the tables. So another soapbox thing, tables are to store data, period. They are not for calculations, summaries, things like that. You can have a very large solution without a single calculated field or a global field in any table except a dashboard table or a summary or anything like that. You can do all of that using other methods if you really want to. Sometimes it's just better But yeah, I strive to I strive for my tables to be pure data and nothing else. The older I get. And I'm like 80. Not that old.
I think this
Is that
calls for a bit of a was I gonna call it manifesto or something like Matt's manifesto of how to, you know, spin up a fairly complicated database like the one you're using
Mm.
to demo. Because if we're redoing something, or we even if you're taking an old database, I've got an old database that uses selector connector. Oh my God.
Mhm.
If I had to put those people on a hosted server, like it's painful for me to work on. But if we have that list of, I don't know, here's, no calculation, your stuff about
Yeah.
setting the fields and not doing auto enter or lookup, and then
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then keeping the layout as simple as you can, and then build as you go, right?
Yeah.
That's going to keep you out of a lot of trouble, I think, and make it easier for the processes to work. Because once you have those scripts that say, I'm going to update the invoice number, and you're thinking that way, when you create a new layout, it's going to be in your head, oh, this
Mm.
layout's got to be, I got to be careful if it's an editable layout.
Yeah.
Now I got to apply my script triggers, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's right.
Otherwise, going back over the stuff, like I got layouts all over the place on some
Right.
of
Yeah,
these
that's the thing. And
solutions that I can't
yeah.
remember where they can be edited. And it's hard to go back. So I'm sure you're
It's
doing that with Kylie. Same thing, right?
a little bit. Her database actually didn't have gigantic record counts, 20,000 maybe, like that, not 100,000 or
Right.
a million. Um and we got and actually the project that she and I were working on was to switch from a LAN system that's old to a WAN system and
Right.
have the users not rebel. And we just launched it, and I think it's working quite well. And also, your joke is really funny. 80 in FileMaker years. Thanks for that, Kylie. Um, like the joke about the lawyer who died and went to talk to St. Peter, and the lawyer said, why did I die? I was in perfect health. I'm only 37 years old. And St. Peter said, well, in billable hours, you're actually 92. Lawyer joke.
You know,
Um,
your bullet point about, simplify until the users complain. I mean, I'd probably recast that in a somewhat more positive way, but it's all my years trying to pretend that I cared about sales. Oop, did I say that? But seriously, I think there's like paying close attention to the actual user scenarios. You can do a lot of partial measures even that get you a lot of mileage. Like I love the client. I hate their database. It's this huge ancient pile of
Yep.
spaghetti.
Yep.
That's at this point very complex, runs their whole business, the usual story, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
They have list views that are seriously painful. And it turns out like they never just want to go to the list view, but that's how the database works. You click on the thing and they want to
Yeah.
do a search there. So I'm like, all I did was change it to go into find mode before they get there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right?
I totally forgot to mention that.
Literally. And it like they
Yeah.
loved that, right? Because they would literally spin, spin, spin. They'd get this huge list. And then they themselves would go into find mode. So I'm like, well, why don't we just do that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Low hanging fruit that got a big return. Yeah.
I'll show like a simple
Yeah.
script that shows that, right? So you have these 4 script steps that I call the magic quartet in classes that I teach, right? It's go to layout, enter find mode, set field, perform find. There's an insane amount of power in these 4 script steps. Like so much more than you'd ever really guess. Okay, enter find mode, pause on no. So if you're going to say, oh, okay, well, I want to find all the invoices for let's see, I don't know, all the invoices in 2020, in August of 2024, right? So I say, okay, well, I want to go to find mode, then I want to set the field invoice date, something, actually 8 slash something slash 2024, right? That would find all the invoices for this month and then perform find. Go to layout, invoice list. And or even worse, like invoice list slow because that's the one that was there, right? So Alexia makes a really good point, really, really good point. So if I run this in this order, where it goes to the invoice list slow, the first thing it's going to do, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, waste 6 seconds just loading all these invoices with whatever data is on that screen. Okay. If I do the exact same thing, but I change the order of these two, that's it. Now look at the difference. So it's going to go to find mode and then go to the layout. It went there instantaneously. And because since it's in find mode, it doesn't have to load any data or look at anything from the record. It sets the date to whatever date it's looking for and does the find.
It doesn't even really flicker, I don't think, does it?
No.
Like you're
So-
going to find mode in a different layout, but it happens so fast,
Yep.
the switch. Okay.
Yeah. So sometimes it's a little tricky because you are doing a new window command. And you can't, if you're opening up another window, you cannot go to find mode before opening the new window.
Right.
So sometimes what I do there is I do a new window command and I go to a layout that's not the one
Empty.
I'm actually going to be at, then go to find mode, then
Yeah.
switch to the other layout. That's
Yeah, the dummy one.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I do a blank layout. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a set of layouts in a solution called fast. And on those layouts, they're just used for scripting. And those are the ones that if I have a script that I need to go to a context of invoice or a line item or company or whatever, I go to that layout in the script. And that's super useful for debugging because when you're debugging it, you can see you have enough fields on the layout that it's useful, but no related fields.
Right.
Or maybe just a handful. It's always in form view, by the way, because list views are really painful. Form views are really fast. Table views are the absolute worst. And so it kills a couple birds with one stone, right? Easy debugging, super fast performance. I guess maybe just those two. Any other hands up? Questions? I love the interaction. Sometimes I get crickets when I do these.
So performing a find. Well, let's say you have a something where somebody needs to perform a find, do something, but it would be a lot better if you did this perform script on server. So you have to recreate the environment or the context that they were in. And so you have to go to their layout, you have to go get their found set, maybe even their sort, but that'd be worst case.
Yeah.
And then export that. I mean, so this is or something like that. So this is actually a real example that I have.
Yeah.
Is the performance is terrible. Maybe even after I do everything that you suggested here.
Yeah. So
Performance is gonna
ultimately,
be great.
you're trying to display a set of records or a set of data that requires an extremely complex query. Is that a fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's something the user makes up, so it's not something I can just put in the script,
Right.
hard coded in there. The user has to be able to define it.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Right. So you kind of have to build that. So I guess one thing that I'll say is I don't know if I can show it in this database or not. Let me take a quick look and see. And then Angelos, you have your hand up too. I do a dashboard class, and I have a lot of little tricks to make this ridiculously fast. And one of them is to populate this list of records. So this could be a really complex query that I always want to see every single time I come to the dashboard. This does not fix your issue of like where the user can define it. But basically what's happening here is I don't know if there's a script trigger on this or not. On layout, on menu load, I guess that's kind of a different one. So basically what happens is yeah, populate data. So where's the good part of the code here? So I guess this one part of it, but this is not happening server side. But what it's basically doing is based on what if the user clicked past or feature or whatever on a button on the screen, it can search in one place or the other and then do a find. If there's records found, then this is the magic line right here. And you can actually perform a script server side that's a really complex query and have the server spit back to you a return separated list, which is basically just a whole bunch of IDs of whatever table that you want to show data in. And so I use a global field in my dashboard called G company ID list. And then the script puts the return separated list in there. And then a regular old relationship from that field to the company table with the return separated list on the left and the primary key on the right. So it's kind of a stack of a few things. But basically,
you said you perform the find on the server, right?
I can. This particular script doesn't do it, but I have a couple of customer systems that do that. And so this can be an insanely complex find to get this list.
Huh.
Any number of fields can be involved, any number of relationships can be involved. It can be, I don't know. Let's like as an example, I want a list of all the companies that have placed an order in the last 3 months when the order was a certain amount, between a certain amount of dollar range, but only for this list of 20 parts in these 6 states from these 4 sales reps, right? That would be an insanely complex search to do because it looks at all the different tables. But if you do it on the server, it runs in a fraction of a second or something like that. And then you get a list. You say, okay, now I have a found set of those companies that match that query. Throw that ID list back to me, stick it in this field, and the data is going to show instantaneously.
How do you think that, how would that compare to, because I know one thing that's nice that it works on server is the save records a snapshot link or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't done that, but I know that can be a thing.
So yeah, it's funny is you can create one over there and bring it back and use it, but you can't take a snapshot link and send it to the server and tell it to recreate your context. Well, except Matt Petrowski had a method for doing that. I guess I'll share the link for that. But
yeah, the snapshot link thing, yeah, I just did it. But yeah, so in the file menu, I really haven't used it, but I know there's a way to do it, right? So the file menu send records as snapshot link, and so that it creates a file on the desktop or wherever you put it that contains information about the layout and all the IDs. And so theoretically, you could email that file to another user of your database. And when they open it, it would go to the right layout, go to the right found set of records and show the stuff.
And sort it.
That's right. But if the user didn't have access to it, or they had access to a different set, it would respect that.
Yeah, and if the records get deleted, things like that, they're going to disappear, of course.
Yeah. So
yeah, the problem is records getting added because it doesn't save the find criteria.
Right.
It saves the ID of the found set. So that's just a bit of a caveat there.
Yeah. So
it's very often that most of the users make the same query filtered down by the ID, they're like user ID. So you can have the greater found set for everyone to be saved in a one record table, and then further filter it out per user with just another key in the relationship. So you can understand the query and layer it in a way that everyone can use the same found set, but then further filter it down
Mhm.
to useful data.
Yeah.
But those one record tables are very useful if you want to store keys and have this last refreshed 10 seconds ago.
Yep.
I mean, not everything is like burning hot, so you can have some data being refreshed on demand, and that's totally
Yeah.
okay, right?
Yeah, the other thing I love about that method is it's partially static. So the field that you have that has the IDs in it is a global. It does not change. If a user creates a record, it doesn't update your list. So there's less flashing. However, if a user deletes a record, it's going to disappear from your portal. If a user changes a value in the record, that value is going to update on your portal. So kind of the next level of doing it would be to actually have your query grab a JSON object and display the JSON object data. And then the entire thing would be in a global. And that's very modern, web style development. And I have kind of a class on that too, because I've been doing that a lot more. I use a JSON field in every table, and I use that to store field data that I don't need a user to be able to search on or do a direct data entry on. And so a single field can actually store hugely flexible types of data in it. It's only useful for certain things, but it's really, really useful for those things. And then also a lot of JSON globals to store preferences in that one record table to store a lot of information. It can store multiple sets of those keys. For example, I think I did it in one client system, but when we're looking here, we've got clients, follow-ups, recently viewed, blah, blah, blah. So I could actually store a single JSON object that has all of the data in there. And the JSON object contains the IDs of all those records. And then when I click on a button, it basically says, oh, okay, well, go get that set of IDs from the global field. It doesn't even hit the server. But of course, it has to hit the server to show the data. Yeah, so anyway. I don't know if that was a good explanation or not of how I do those things, but I rely on it a lot for showing data, especially rather than just a whole list of things, but you can have it like for counts, like on that dashboard. I'll have to show my screen yet again. The other objects on my dashboard, like how many numbers are here, how many numbers are here, like how do I get that data? Right, this data is just stored in my JSON field called dashboard JSON. And it's just grabbing dashboard dot follow-up count and then coloring it. And this one's the same thing, like getting data from a goal. So if I go to my data, I think it's no. I have a layout that has all the stuff in it, of course, and I can't find it. Chart. Well, let's do it the other way. I'll just stick the field here so we can take a look at it. So this is the data in the JSON field. So it actually has a set of keys, and then it also says count Monday 5, Tuesday 10, blah, blah, blah. So if I were to delete all this, then all the data that was used by it goes away. But then if I go into something, come back to the dashboard, it gets refreshed. Well, actually, that didn't. But I can have the script automatically do a query to refresh all that stuff. So that I can see.
So wait, I was just about to ask that question because I thought I did. So you update the JSON blob of data by a script. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, upon login.
Got it.
So
it's not actually fully live in that case.
No, well, again, this is the demo database. So in customer databases that are live, this one actually does this query and grabs all the keys. So usually, and you can also time it, right? So like if a user comes here and goes back to the dashboard and they're only there for a second, why would you refresh it? So you can have a timer that says if they've been away from the dashboard for 5 minutes or 15 minutes, then run this script to refresh the data. So that's something you can choose to do.
You said an on-timer script?
No, I wouldn't do it that way. You could do it
Oh.
that way, but what I actually think this should just be static. I think that the dashboard should not change when the user's looking at it. That's totally a soapbox issue. I mean, there may be rules about it because the user shouldn't be just sitting here all day. They're going into the database and doing things. But if they're in here and then they click back to here, they're running a script.
Yeah.
And the script can say, "Oh, you're doing something. Look at the JSON, and there's a thing in there that says what was the time stamp that you last loaded the dashboard? Calculate how many minutes it's been from then to now, and if it's been over a certain amount, then redo my queries to update my fields data." That's kind of.
You can also stamp the payload with a UUID and let the server decide if this is outdated or not. So like this was the last state.
Yeah,
If you have the
something like
same ID, yeah, it can stay the same, I guess.
Well, I guess you could even tell the user how old the data is too. Just a little.
Yep.
Put the timestamp right up there.
We've gone over time because I love FileMaker and talking about it and sharing. So I'm going to keep doing these every 2 weeks. I think I'm going to try to do these classes, the same free class. Give me topics of what to do them on. I mean, I've got upcoming ones for like script essentials, but that's not going to be interesting to any of you, I don't think. So yeah, let me know what you want to do. I've also got one. I've been doing a lot of stuff with semantic search and having a ball with that. So that would be, much more of a discussion because a lot of people have way more experience with AI than I do so far.
Matt, can you tell me a little bit about like on the paid version of this class, what would be covered? Like how would that go?
The biggest difference with the paid version of the class is I'm not sharing my sample database. You guys are sharing your database and talking about your questions. And then we're actually looking at real examples of specific problems that you have and then why it's slow and then fixing it and making it fast. So it's kind of like consulting/training.
I was going to say it's more like a group consulting versus a class.
So each person gets their problem solved. I mean, if there's 40 people, it's not going to be. But I mean, I'm just launching this. There's going to be 3, 4, 5 people for the next one. Several classes.
It's like group therapy for FileMaker.
I don't want to call it that, but it's a little like that.
Oh, so it's Michael was asking, what about Matt's FM search results?
Yeah. So
is it the one you displayed, you shared?
The search results, yeah. You mean as a class to do? How to integrate it?
Oh, no. So I was thinking Eric was looking for a way to do complex searches for his customers and trying to push that to the server and then get back a list of IDs and then recreating it. So how do you do that? Well, maybe you create a layout that is very similar to you've got a search layout, right? Bunch of globals maybe. And your customers can enter into that and you pass those along to the server and you can find the right context. But Matt's created this FM search results thing
which is free.
That might do something very similar to what you're trying to do because it allows them to do a lot of complex.
Matt. Okay.
Yeah. So search results.
Yes.
Search results, which you guys can download for free at Navarre.Training. And I have a radically updated version of it that I did recently, converting it to entire JSON and perform script on server and a lot of other improvements. What it does is it searches across multiple different tables in your database and only looks for the data that actually matches the thing that the user typed in. So if a user types in a date or a number or text or a name of a person, it figures out what that is and then only looks in the fields that contain that type of data. All of the finds are instantaneously fast because they're only ever searches on indexed fields in the table. Then it collects that whole entire thing of all the results from all of the tables and displays it on one page, Google style page. And then if you click on any of the lines, it takes you to that record in that table.
Huh.
That's kind of what it does. And
What's the latest version of that, by the way?
well,
7?
I think so. I'm working on an AI version now.
I just put the link in. I think it's from your training site.
Oh, thanks.
Oh yeah,
I found one that was older in the Claris
yeah,
marketplace,
that's the one.
but
7. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Soapbox. Pretty much every database could benefit from having search results integrated. It takes 20 minutes to put the stuff in, maybe an hour to customize it. And it just pays dividends. I've some of the databases I put it in users have done countless millions of searches through it. Because it's basically kind of adding Google, a single search field. Yeah, it's going to be really hard to get semantic search working with it. I definitely have some obstacles, but that's kind of where I'm trying to get with it.
Well, and to your point of stripping things down and adding things as they go, then it's so easy to add extra things to search when people want to be able to find this field or find this in it. It's so easy just to add it in.
Yeah. Okay, that'll be one of my free upcoming classes.
yeah, I'd love that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I got to jet. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This was really fun too, and I'm really glad for all the feedback from everyone.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Awesome.
That was great.
Good to see you guys.
Have a good one.
Rocky, if you're
everyone.
still here, I need a little bit of time before I'm going to be able to meet with you. Probably like 30, 40 minutes. Rocky, you're still on mute, but I wanted to let you know.
I figure out who this other Eric is.
2 Erics.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Thanks again. See
Thank
you
you,
guys.
Matt.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for the tips.